we're back with the hot pink boys that are the Arachnophiles. This will be our second Advanced Edition squad, starting with our boy Ralph Carlson in the Bulk Mech. It's a brute class with a little ricochet rocket action. We have the Arachnoid Mech, which is the ranged class mech, and sort of the star of the show. Its weapon creates little spiderling minions, and mastery of these things is an important part of mastering this squad. And lastly, we have the science class mech, the Slide Mech, which does a omnidirectional push in a single direction, including itself. So, Arachnophiles, they've got, let's see, their biggest weakness at the onset is damage output. So when you're considering your first island, you want to be keeping an eye out for Leapers, the 1 HP Vec. I can see we've got Leapers on RST. Pinnacle Robotics is also another valid choice. The 1 HP robots are relatively common. Because basically, we've also got Leapers on Detritus. And since we don't have the self-destruct scion, I believe I picked Detritus as my first island. It seemed to be the easiest, and the Arachnophiles kind of need some help. They've got a rough start at the beginning, primarily because they have a very low damage output. The Arachnophile Arachnoid Injector starts off doing only 1 damage, and you need to do a kill shot in order to spawn a little spiderling robot. So you want to be looking for those early 1 HP enemies. A pilot that boosts damage, such as Kai, is a very nice boon for this squad. But, we've been doing this series just starting with a fresh Ralph Carlson. We have no real other starting advantages. So I'm considering my first mission, and I think I pick Defend the VIPs first. It's a relatively easy mission. The objective you need to defend is mobile and can kind of, get itself out of sticky situations. And we've got a pair of Leapers. And while dealing with webbing is always irritating, it's nice to have low HP enemies on hand so that we can start spawning spiderlings. Now, the spiderlings are sort of like the walking bombs from the bomber mechs, but they are persistent. If you do not use them, they will last multiple turns. Unlike the bomberlings, which you need to kind of use or lose, they will self-destruct at the end of a turn. But the usage behind them is a similar philosophy. You can use the spiderlings to block Vec attacks, you can use them to block Vec spawns, and instead of a self-destruct 1 damage attack, the spiderlings do a 1 damage push. So if the things are correct, if the weather is correct, then the Arachnoid Mech can cause 2-for-1 solves. It can kill something, spawn a spiderling, and then the spiderling can go and solve some other problem. So on this turn, we have 1 threat to the grid. And you can see the Slide Mech, even though its attack is technically non-damaging, you can be offensive with it by squishing things. That's what I did to that Leaper. Looks like I'm going to mostly focus my attentions this turn on clearing out enemies. But then I see I've got a problem. I can either body block the attack from the Firefly. See, I can spawn a spiderling, but then the spiderling can't actually solve any problems for me. So I think I actually wind up using a temporal reset. Yep. So starting over, instead of squishing that Leaper, we're going to body block with the Slide Mech. And then I think I can just do the same thing here. And we can spawn a spiderling. Now, you want to, if possible, always be spawning ABS, because it opens up options for you. And one thing that I try to do with these spiderlings, see, we've got our little boy, comes out of the dead regen Scion. Now, if the Spiderling is not capable of solving an important problem, you actually don't want to do anything with it. You want to leave it alone. You can move it, you can reposition it, but then it will just persist into future turns. Because as soon as you attack with the Spiderling, it will die. So, at least how I play the Arachnophiles is what I try to do is I try to bank potential action advantage with them. If I don't need to use a Spiderling, then I'm not going to use it. I'm going to just keep them around. And then later in the mission, you can kind of do this alpha strike turn where you have a very large action advantage that you can use to do all manner of things. Speaking of 2-for-1 solves, the bulk mech can sometimes do that. Its attack is very interesting, and it takes some getting used to. You strike one target, push it forward, and then from the spot where the first target was, the projectile will then move 90 degrees, either left or right. And then it will hit another target, do 1 damage, and push. So, if you are... It is capable of doing a lot of damage, it's just kind of spread out between multiple targets, depending on how the targets are lined up. You want to be keeping an eye out for Vek that are in rows, and then you have to try and maneuver the mech to be able to strike multiple targets, which is sometimes easier said than done. But you can see that, again, I've spawned another Spiderling, and we are just keeping them in reserve. We do not need to use them yet. They're incapable of actually dealing a death blow to these Fireflies. They're tough customers. But, you know, it is soon to be our third turn, and our action advantage has ballooned. We're now at a functional 2v5, my favor. But, you know, as soon as I use one of my bonus actions, I will lose them. Sometimes you can be doing well enough that you don't need to use the Spiderlings, and you'll start to kind of get a glut of Spiderlings. And when that happens, it is often better to start to consider to use them. If you use a Spiderling to block a spawn on the penultimate turn, that's basically just guaranteeing 1 less Vek you have to worry about on the final round. So that's what I'm doing with my current allotment of Spiderlings. And I still have 1 in reserve that I can use for a rainy day. Our final turn will be a 2v4 action advantage, my favor. We're just going to be losing some of those banked Spiderlings. Ideally, when you kill a Vek and spawn a Spiderling, you want to have that, you know, the death of said Vek be also solving a problem. Whether it be, you know, protecting the grid or protecting an objective. Killing a Vek just to spawn a Spiderling often is not going to be solving other important problems. And it might require you to use a Spiderling, you know, to solve a problem, which is okay. Like, for instance, on this turn, I lack the ability to do sufficient damage to kill that Firefly on G2, but I can simply just block its attack with that Spiderling, and we are in the clear. And then as a little fancy maneuver, I'm going to be getting a little bit of extra XP. I managed to do some damage with the slide mech and then finish off that Firefly. Give my pilots a little bonus. The slide mech is also an interesting unit. It's quite powerful. You know, it can do multiple forced movements. And while repositioning itself is often useful and can solve problems, you want to keep an eye out for opportunities to do bump damage with it. You know, sliding enemies into mountains, into other enemies. The main weakness of the slide mech at the beginning of a run with the Arachnophiles is that it only has 2 HP, and it needs to get very close to the enemy. So for my next mission, I elect to go with the Kill 4 Enemies with Acid mission. We've got the little acid tank to help us, and I also saw that there were a number of incidental acid pools on the ground. So I thought we had pretty decent odds of a successful mission here. The Arachnophiles have a slightly above average maneuverability in that the slide mech has a native movement of 4. But the bulk mech and arachnid mech are, slower. Their base speed 3. But they're also tougher. The arachnid mech, it has 3 HP, which is on the tougher side for a ranged class unit. So it can afford to get a little bit closer to the action, if need be. We've spawned a spiderling. I'm just trying to find good opportunities for, starting our mission objective. And now it's up to the slide mech to simply get the grid safe in good condition for us. So that was a pretty clean first turn, and now we're at a relatively neutral 4v4.5 action advantage. If we count the acid tank as maybe being worth half an action. And I'm happy to see the Vec getting themselves doused in acid for us. We've only got one legitimate threat to the grid. But yes, at the beginning of a run, the Arachnophiles, have to be very careful with positioning. The fact that you're only doing 1 damage with the ricochet rockets and the arachnoid injector means you want to be very cognizant of opportunities to be doing more damage. That's also part of the reason I was inclined to pick Detritus. The acid status effect helps you make up for that damage gap. And I elect to, just take a hit on the arachnid mech and bank a spiderling. Or rather, keep the spiderling banked. But we are well on track for our mission objective. Skipping forward a little bit ahead in time. This being our penultimate turn, this is usually about the time when you want to consider actually starting to commit your spiderlings to action. Spiderlings that are just kind of sitting around not doing anything on the last turn are sort of like wasted potential. Here's an opportunity for the slide mech to get a couple of kills in, which is cool. And that will be mission accomplished. And then if you are judicious, you can often have turns end or missions end like this, where you can just use your spiderlings to block the remaining spawns, and then this final turn is just a free turn. Squad's capable, especially on unfair difficulty, of ending an entire turn early. Is definitely a sign of potency. I would say that the Arachnophiles, they're a pretty strong squad, but they're not the strongest, and they can definitely struggle if things go against them. This run is going relatively smoothly so far, but we will see if the winds of change alter my fortunes here. I like to go for a pretty easy and safe protect the coal plant mission. We've got shielded buildings. We have also got this very long conveyor belt, but it is mostly on my side of the board, so I'm curious to see how much it will disrupt the enemy, if at all. But the Op4 on this island is relatively chill. It is mostly non-advanced edition mech. Fireflies, scarabs, leapers. As a seasoned veteran, these are things that I can handle. The Regen Scion threatens to potentially be an irritant for the low-damage squad that is the Arachnophiles. And take a look at this starting turn. This is a good example of sometimes where the Arachnophiles can struggle. We don't have any 1 HP enemies on the board, so I either have to spend actions weakening them with the other 2 mechs before the Arachnid mech can spawn a Spiderling or not. And thanks to the conveyor belt, that Scarab will not end up attacking the power plant, the coal plant. It'll just take out one of the shielded buildings. That is something I can live with, if need be. So the Arachnid mech doesn't really have a good target this turn. But what I can do is set up things for either future kill, such as weakening that Scarab, which is what I commit to doing. Or I could have damaged the Alpha Scarab, and then it would have been killed by its friend. I think that maybe would have been the better play, but we'll see how this works out for me. I guess because the Alpha Scarab remains another valid target to produce a Spiderling, so now I've got kind of 2 options, depending on what the enemy winds up attacking. And indeed, the Alpha Scarab is the primary target here. The non-alpha just happens to be attacking my slide mech. And then I have the conundrum of dealing with the Alpha Fireflies attack on C4, targeting the grid. And what I think I wind up doing is just body blocking it with the Spiderling I just made. Sometimes you have to use them as soon as they are created. And that's okay, as long as they are serving an important purpose. Ooh, I get a little bit daring. I see. We're going to weaken that Firefly such that we do have a Spiderling producing target. That's sort of guaranteeing the Arachnid mech has something useful it can do on the next turn, rather than just kind of being passive. The pilot in the Arachnid mech levels up and gets Popular Hero, which is mostly good, but kind of bad. It means, I'm going to be losing a pilot, and I will bench them rather than risk having them get killed. Ralph gets Finisher, which is relatively useful. And then we can just use that Spiderling to block a spawn, it being our second to last turn. Between the bulk mech and the slide mech, I was able to do enough maneuvering, and this was a favorable enough map seed that even though I was not able to generate a great many Spiderlings in this mission, I still emerged pretty okay. Take advantage of that Finisher to get Ralph some extra XP. And then there's really nothing else for my other mechs to do, other than just do some damage out of spite. So again, smooth sailing so far. Unusually smooth sailing. I often struggle with the early game on the Arachnophiles. It takes me, I don't know, it takes my brain a little bit of extra time to get used to their strange method of operation. So now that we've got Popular Hero, we're definitely going to bench that pilot, and then we're going to leave the slide mech empty. It only has 2 HP, and it is sometimes prone to destruction, especially before you can get some upgrades online. So an empty slide mech is okay. It's a decent thing to have. I have my final decision here for my mission before the boss fight. And I'm not sure I liked any of my options. We have kill 7 enemies, with the enemies producing acid, like extra spawns coated in acid. And I thought that maybe this would allow me to rack up the kills, rack up some spiderlings. But we're going to see how this mission goes. Everything was going so smoothly, and I kind of jinxed myself here. I'm not sure if any of the other missions would have been a better choice in retrospect. Hard to say. We get the time pod finally, and that was also kind of something going against me. That first power core is very important for the Arachnophiles. It opens up some useful options for them. Primarily the self-shield option on the slide mech. It boosts its survivability. In some ways, it also boosts its offensive capabilities, in that it can kind of smash into things and be less concerned about taking damage. So this is going to be a really tricky mission here. We've got enemies spawning in from the slime pools, or the acid pools. So we've gotten 1 enemy kill, but we've already consumed a spiderling. And we've got this regen scion, so any extra damage I'm doing is going to be being cured, which is problematic because we want to be racking up lots of kills. I think I was also hoping on using the acid pools to my advantage, like pushing enemies into them, but that didn't really pan out. We've got 3 threats to the grid, including a threat to the coal plant. This is a really bad map for the ricochet rocket. There are certain map seeds that are just really not conducive to it. Typically, maps that have pockets of grid buildings next to each other, especially ones with really tight corridors, because the projectile has to ricochet. And sometimes you don't want to push things into the grid, and you also don't want to have the shot ricochet and then hit the grid. It can be a bad time. Thanks to the initiative order, the Alpha Firefly is able to kill the non-Alpha for me. But I do take an extra hit that I didn't otherwise want to take. We've got 2 turns left to finish the mission objective, but 4 enemies to kill. I feel as if I'm slightly behind maybe the schedule. The enemy also continues to be consistent in threatening the grid rather than my mechs. The bulk mech on this turn is also somewhat out of position. It's not in a good spot to handle multiple enemies. Also, hindsight being 2020. I see a way I could have maybe done this different that I regret. Ah, see, I didn't even see it. There was a solve based on that board state. It involved shooting the Alpha Firefly. Since it had acid, I would have been able to kill it. And then I could have used the slide mech to move the Scarab out of the way. I think that would have been a better solve. Instead, I make some weird choices. I do not know why I commit to that move. It's a sacrifice play, first of all. I'm going to be giving up my slide mech's ability to act on the final turn. See, I could have gotten a very similar result and not had to use my temporal reset, and I, for some reason, didn't see it. And I make the really weird decision of losing my slide mech here on the final turn. And I'm going to pay dearly for, voluntarily giving up my action advantage. I don't know what I was smoking. I thought that maybe between spawning a spiderling, I could, do something to close out the turn perfectly. Instead, I am dismayed to see that I lack the ability to do anything to stop the Scarab from destroying the coal plant. So that is my perfect island reward forfeited. All I can wind up doing is protecting Ralph, and then body blocking the Firefly. But that was it. There was nothing else I could do. So yeah, I just kind of... I could have gotten through that probably okay. But that was just a real bad play. And I was so frustrated with myself that I almost gave up the run right here. But I remembered that I did have Popular Hero, so I was going to be getting, 4 extra reputation at the end of the island. And I was like, you know what, let's stick with it. Maybe I'll get something cool. And indeed, from the time pod, we get our first power core, and then I believe I'm going to be sticking that into the slide mech. That's usually where I place it. And then we also got Viscera Nanobots, which is, an interesting little passive to have as an extra toy. I consider the acid upgrade for the Arachnid Injector, but I decide to go on a more defensive option. The slide mech, it just could use that little extra bit of survivability, and the shield really does make a difference. So now we have to face the Beetle Eater, and this map is absolute cancer for the Arachnophiles. These types of buildings, look at this, there are so few safe vectors for the Ricochet rocket to fire. This is going to be really, really painful. I can tell, just from the map. It's also not very useful for the slide mech. The slide mech has very limited options to do its little slide scoocheroo without bumping into the grid. And the corporate tower is just right there, front and center on the enemy side of the board. So I know we're going to be in trouble here. So there we have it. 5 threats to the grid, every single Vec attacking buildings. We got 5 threats and 3 actions to do something about it. In theory, each of these mechs is capable of doing a 2-for-1 or better. But the bulk mechs options are extremely limited. It can't hit the Leaper on F6 without pushing it into the grid. Really, its only option is to attack the Leaper on B4. But then that leaves the question of who is going to stop the Alpha Firefly on D4 from destroying the corporate tower. I am not sure I have the ability to do that. I consider spawning a Spiderling and blocking the Beetle Leader's attack. Is this the unhappy best thing I could come up with? We're going to take 2 grid damage, but at least the corporate tower is okay. But you are still at a 5v3. We are hemorrhaging grid health. This is another very unfortunate turn here. The Arachnid mech is stuck by that Leaper. I can save it by using one of the other 2 mech's actions. But I am not sure I will be able to safely defend the corporate tower in that eventuality. The bulk mech doesn't have an angle on it. It could try to body block, but then it will get killed by the Alpha Firefly's attack, the Alpha Firefly on D2. And even if I do free the Arachnid mech, it doesn't have any good targets to then produce a Spiderling with. But I also don't want to lose a pilot, because I'm not going to be getting any replacements. I've already failed my perfect island reward. So I elect to try and whittle down the health on the Beetle Leader. And since I know I'm not getting my perfect island reward already, we give up the tower, which is a bummer. The functional 5v3 drops to more of a 4v3, but we now have enemy health respawning, regenerating, which is irritating. And the Beetle Leader continues to be in a nasty position. I elect to just take it out. This is a 2-for-1. It does protect the grid on A3 from the Firefly's attack, but we lose even more grid health in the process. Things are getting nasty. And I can't even create a Spiderling. I elect to just damage the Firefly. It'll still be alive, but it'll be, I think, at 1 HP. And thus a valid target to create a Spiderling. And then our final turn is a small mercy. We just have to prevent that one Firefly from attacking the grid, and we can get a little bit of XP. And that will be the end of what was initially a smooth island, but we are hurting here at the end of our first island. We're down to 2 grid health. We don't get a perfect island reward. The only thing going for us is we do have a popular hero pilot to sell, so we will have 9 reputation available to spend. And I think I'm inclined to just dump it into power cores. We really need to get some upgrades going. The things available to me are the shock cannon and the seismic capacitor, a brute and science class weapons, respectively. But I don't see them being that much of a upgrade, you know, that it's worth not just investing heavily into cores here. Importantly, the Arachnid mech really needs a 2 power core upgrade to get its damage up to 2. I know that doesn't seem like a lot, but going from 1 to 2 damage is quite a big deal. It does open up a lot of options. It lets you kill 2 HP non-alpha Vec. It lets you kill Scions instantly to create a Spiderling. Here I am testing out the Shield Ally upgrade on the Slide Mech to see if it worked on grid buildings. But it does not work, so I do not... I undo that and invest the cores elsewhere. Yes, using the Test Mech ability can be useful. It's a tool that you shouldn't forget is there. So there's the damage upgrade for the Arachnoid mech. And then I think I sink the next one into just a movement upgrade for either the bulk mech or maybe the Arachnid mech. They definitely can use the maneuverability upgrade. So join me for next time to see if I can salvage this run and keep these hot pink boys going. We've got more tips and tricks for the Arachnophiles in the near future.